there are any other hidden issues. Like, don't press go live, but see if you'll just bring you to the screen.
I can't do it right now because I just need to be made the host for that.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah.
So do I need to make you the host?
Yes.
I need to make Renee the host. I'm going to do that now. And then will you make me a co-host?
Yes.
Okay.
Would one of you, oh, there she is. Excellent. Yay. Hi, Stasha.
And then Renee, not to just do it too quickly, can you make, okay, never mind, you already did it. On top of things.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Welcome. I think not everybody knows each other, but you can see each other's faces and your names.
And then the Zoom, sorry, the Facebook description is just what I need now.
But it brought you to that page.
Yep. Yeah,
Oh,
we're good to go.
good to
All we
go
have
then.
do is like hit.
Awesome. Yeah, so you just press go live when you're ready to go live.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna jump out, but text me if y'all need anything.
Renee, you're letting people into the room?
Yes, I will be. We have one person and then waiting room. Lane, did you let Katie in?
I didn't. I don't know where she went.
I mean,
I mean-
she's in the meeting. So hi, Katie.
Oh,
And guys, I'm gonna keep track of time, so I'll give you some warnings just in your direct chats.
okay. Well, it's 2:30. Is everybody ready? We can, I think everybody's in from the waiting room. Should we give it one more minute to let people?
Yeah, maybe give it a couple more minutes. Yeah, I bet people are coming over from other things.
Okay.
Unless we're very unpopular.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. Welcome to Constructing a New Social Compact, a public forum on empowering the post-pandemic working class. I'm Lane Wyndham, the Associate Director of the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown, and we're thrilled that you're joining us for this event today. Our session is entitled Workers' Technology Rights as 21st Century Labor Standards. We are recording our event today. We will also be live streaming it on Facebook And the recording will be available on Facebook, and we'll also send it out to attendees over the next several weeks. So the recording will be available. Today's event is part of a 4-day virtual convening featuring more than 25 sessions with 150 presenters from 5 continents. I'm going to drop the schedule in the chat, and I hope that you all can join us for many sessions. And I now am going to, I should say, we're going to, the chat is going to be open. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, say who you are and your organization. We're also going to take questions for the panelists through the chat function. So put those questions in the chat. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Annette Bernhardt. Annette.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the panel. It's wonderful to see folks. My name is Annette Bernhardt. I'm with the UC Berkeley Labor Center. I am joined by an amazing panel of worker advocates. We have Sheheryar Kaoosji from the Warehouse Workers Resource Center. We have Stasha Lampert from SEIU Local 2015. We have Ryan Gerety, United for Respect, Gabrielle Rejouis from Color of Change. And I also want to acknowledge Jane Chung from Public Citizen, who's been a key partner in our work and helped to pull this panel together. So we are here today to talk about, we're here today to talk about the growing use of digital technologies in the workplace. Namely that our employers are increasingly monitoring workers, they're collecting data on workers, they're using algorithms to make decisions based on that data in ways that stand to have profound impacts on workers. And I want to really flag that we're talking about much more than worker privacy here. Worker privacy is important, but there's a much broader set of potential harms to workers from these digital technologies, like discrimination, negative effects on worker health and safety, de-skilling, digital taylorism, work intensification, job displacement and outright automation, lower wages and economic instability from on-call scheduling, shifting the employment relationship to contingent work, suppressing the right to organize. And then importantly, I think also just a general loss of autonomy and dignity for workers. And there's many other harms, but this is just to give you a sense of the scale of the impact, the potential impact that these digital technologies can have on workers. And then obviously COVID has just accelerated the use of digital tech. And I would say in our view, these new technologies are going to be going forward increasingly the terrain on which workers fight for power and economic justice. So it is high time for us to really focus on both understanding the tech, but then also really strategizing about what we need to protect workers and to enable them to gain power over this tech. The problem right now is that there is virtually a vacuum of regulation. It really is the Wild West in terms of how employers are collecting data, how they're monitoring their workers, how they're using algorithms. It's a profound asymmetry of power. And while unions are starting to bargain on these issues, I think we are really only at the very beginning of figuring out what the tech actually is and how we need to be reining it in. So our proposition in this panel is the following. A new social compact must include a robust set of worker rights around digital technology, both via public policy and collective bargaining. We literally need a new set of 21st century labor standards regulating how employers use this tech. And in that, I really want to lift up in particular the potential harms to racial justice and gender equity, both in terms of the actual bias in the tech itself. And there's been a lot of discussion about that recently. But I think also importantly, in terms of who's most likely to be employed in the jobs, especially low-wage jobs and frontline jobs, where the tech is being experimented with. So the equity piece of this is absolutely critical. And then finally, before we get into the presentations, I also want to flag that there is a much bigger ecosystem of advocates here who are focusing on this technology, but in other domains, like criminal justice, immigration, elections, civil liberties, racial justice. And I think it is an incredibly important opportunity to make common cause here across the various sites in our lives, in the broad span of our lives where this technology is being applied. So our presentations are going to make the case for workers' technology rights from a number of different angles. And we are going to start off with Sheheryar.
Thank you, and thank you all for having me. My name is Sheheryar Kaoosji, and I'm the Executive Director of the Warehouse Worker Resource Center. We're a nonprofit based in inland Southern California, and we bring workers together to improve their conditions, and our focus is on supporting the non-union workers in the massive inland region of Southern California, where there's well over 200,000 workers moving goods for all of us, including a lot of employees of companies like Amazon and Walmart. So I'll start by just giving a little bit of the history and context of our experience with issues around pace of work. We really started doing our work around Walmart and their third-party facilities in the Inland Empire about 10 years ago. And what we saw there, and we had a lot of specific significant campaigns among workers around pace of work with those workers. It was a lot more what you see as a traditional workplace. You see, workers had quotas and certain rates that they had to make, both individuated but also collective. But it was really enforced through, your usual manager walking by every 10 minutes saying, pick it up, high and tight, get going, rather than any kind of consistent kind of engagement. Workers would go fast when they had to, they'd keep up with what they needed to do. And, that's kind of typical of warehouses that, don't have technologized, pace of work structures. Other facilities have conveyor belts, right, where there's not necessarily a number, but you got to keep up or the stuff falls on the floor. Those kinds of systems are really typical. Obviously, this is nothing new. This stuff's been around for hundreds of years. But what we've seen is that really the concern around how to campaign around pace of work when you're dealing with individuals and managers is really cranked up and taken to another level when it's technologized, when it's made systematic, and when workers are tracked intensely. So this was already a problem that we were dealing with, and something that always became kind of an area of contention between workers and managers, and occurs in our non-union workplaces, is bargained in unionized workplaces that have Teamsters and other union representation. But what we're seeing again is that Amazon and some of the companies that are trying to track and be like Amazon, because they're not the only one, are really taking it to the next level. So compared to what I just described, the situation is Amazon facilities in our region, especially the fulfillment centers, which are the big mega facilities that have 4,000 or 5,000 people and really store most of the goods that make it to market. Workers have specific rates, a certain number of products they have to process or move or deliver per hour, or sometimes per minute, depending on their task. So a worker who's pulling boxes off of a conveyor, for a while that it was 4 boxes per minute. Now at some point it got changed to 6 boxes per minute. They have to get off of a conveyor and put onto a pallet to be wrapped. Other workers that are picking off of those shelves, the workers who walk 10 or 15 miles a day, have again like a certain number of miles or a certain number of products they have to get per shift, but also per hour. That is tracked very precisely by your scanner. Usually you track exactly how many scans you're doing, how many products you're actually moving, and how you're doing with regard to the rate that was set for you. Often those rates are not clear. Sometimes workers working side by side have different rates that are, it's not really clear why one person has one rate, one person has another. And I'll get back to that, but that's kind of, the fact is this is a scientific sheen put on kind of traditional work practices. I think there's we need to distinguish between kind of what the technology says and the way it actually plays out. The way it actually plays out is just like any other bullshit warehouse. People utilize these systems to target people that they would have targeted anyways. There's no real transparency or no real way to understand that there's any equality around this. So again, the scanners and tools are tracked. Often workers in some facilities are put on either a leaderboard where they're saying, oh, you're among the top 10, but there's also a loser board. The bottom 10 people, your names are put up in lights in the facility saying you're at the lower level of the productivity rate for today. That goes up at lunch, sometimes at the breaks, and people go and check their rates to see how they're doing, but also they can see who else isn't doing well. Sometimes that leads to collective punishment. Workers who are told, because that person is going slow, you're all, going to get into trouble. Either, you're going to, have some sort of discipline, or you're not going to get some sort of reward, or more often individuated punishment, workers being written up. And, if you are written up for not making your rate, especially if you're a seasonal employee, that basically means you're not going to keep working there. Seasonal employees can't have any write-ups if they're going to be made permanent. So it really is a situation that leads to the algorithm and the tracking leads to huge amounts of opportunities for managers to use their discipline as strongly as they want. One other aspect that I'll mention, something you often hear about, is called time off task. Workers are allotted a certain amount of TOT, often 30 minutes per day, to go to the bathroom or take other stops in scanning. Basically, it's tracked by how often you're scanning. And if you can have only 30 minutes of time off task, not counting your breaks and lunch. So if you have a bathroom that's 12 minutes away and you have to go to the bathroom and it takes you 24 minutes to walk there and back, not counting actually being there, that's your TOT for the day. And if you have to go to the bathroom again, you will go over your max and they will speak to you or discipline you electronically. That kind of situation was, existed before COVID, and then with COVID, with the needs to, sanitize, to wash your hands, et cetera, is not taken into consideration. This leads to two things. First, really high turnover. Amazon fulfillment sortation centers have, according to some research NELP did, well over 100% turnover every year. That is what we've seen on the ground in the Inland Empire, where Amazon is our largest employer, but also there's a ton of people who work there and then just can't keep up or don't feel like they can keep up, or were terminated because they didn't keep up. And so these facilities really just burn through people, and we see that as a huge destabilizing force on our region and our economy. Secondly, and even more impactful, is the injury rate. Because people are working so fast, we know that leads to higher injury rates. Amazon's injury rate is 7.7 injuries per 100 on a national level, which is about twice the average for warehouses and about 3 times the average for the economy in general. And at Eastvale, which is a mega warehouse in Riverside County that we come across a lot of workers from, I think in 2019, it was 17 injuries per 100. So close to 20%, close to 20% of the workforce every year is getting injured. And this is something that, these are the injuries that actually make it to the OSHA logs, let alone the ones that workers are discouraged from reporting or don't bring up. So our analysis again of this is that this is nothing new, right? Taylorism and these kinds of systems have always existed. And it's not, it is a sheen of kind of scientific management that goes on top of the existing forms of structural forms of management. What this leads to is the managers have another tool. If they want to get rid of you, they have this tool that's coming down from the algorithm that says, this person didn't make rate. They don't fire everyone who doesn't make rate. They don't fire everyone who doesn't make TOT. It's pretty much arbitrary. So what that does, it reinforces the racial and gender and other biases that exist within capitalism, within these facilities, and it gives them another tool to say, hey, it's not because you're this identity, but it's because you didn't make rate. And that's really kind of the key thing that we see. Workers don't understand why one person gets disciplined as opposed to another. And that's the point, right? It's not the point is to like say, hey, we're all on the same page. There's no transparency at this point. Again, like different workers side by side with different rates, with different quotas, with different treatment based on their productivity. Nobody really knows what the hell is going on, and you're always on you're always on your toes, which is the point. So that's kind of how we see this system working, and that's that means it's working, right? That's the idea. It's not the system not working. That's not the science not making it. That's the system working perfectly. So in terms of what we want to do about this, long term, we need to get rid of rate. We need to get rid of TOT. We need to establish working conditions in these facilities and others that are related to the human capacities of workers. Rebuild the structures of through both government and unions through which these conversations can occur. And there's both a role for government and for collective bargaining or worker organizing to push back against these things. There needs to be a baseline where, again, the state can come in and say this place has got way too many injuries. There seems to be some issue with how fast you're moving people. But there also needs to be a space where workers can negotiate that collectively. So it's not, again, some number of workers who are told they're the fast ones and you're the slow ones, and those workers are pitted against each other, because that's the most common situation. And we know that that's a huge problem around how to organize. In terms of what we're trying to do at this point, we have a small but we think significant policy that we're moving in California. So along with other partners in the Athena network, as well as the LA Federation of Labor, as well as the Teamsters, we're moving Assembly Bill 701 in California, which would create a situation where Kaoosji would be able to review and regulate, establish a Kaoosji standard around pace of work in facilities that have these kinds of quotas, whether they're explicit or implicit quotas. It would also require there to be transparency for workers to understand what their rate is, and that there'd be transparency to the state, that the state would be able to examine and look at where the provenance of these quotas, which we think are pretty arbitrary. It's a step in the right direction, and we think that if this bill moves forward, it could give us a structure through which we can have these kinds of conversations with workers. But at the end of the day, the workers need to address this directly through direct action in their workplaces. We have, again, organized workers in the past to slow things down. That happened at Amazon facilities in other parts of the country last year, where they said because of COVID, you need to slow down and we need to have more time. It really does come down to worker power at the end of the day, and that's what will change the way that these places operate. But I think that's what we want people to come away with, is these kinds of regulations and structures will allow workers to be able to speak up about this and say this is unacceptable, but also provide information to the general public and the government to say these are the implications of these rates of work, injuries, high turnover, all those different things that we know have huge systemic problems for our society. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheheryar. Next, we're going to hear from Stasha.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stasha. I work for SEIU Local 2015 in research and policy. So I'm going to be sharing about the electronic visit verification system, which is something that we've done a lot of campaigning against on behalf of our workers who are home care workers, who are largely family providers. In many counties, like well over half are people who are just providing care in their home to family members, spouses, children. So electronic visit verification is something that was required federally. It was passed as part of the 21st Century Cures Act, which was a large bill that was largely about a whole bunch of other things. It was supported by the pharmaceutical industry. It was pretty controversial with consumer groups, but there was a little portion in it that required electronic visit verification for Medicaid funded services for any personal care that takes place in people's homes. And it requires that certain bits of information be collected. So they want to know who's providing the care, what type of care they're providing, and most notably, they want like a location, specifically a GPS location, to prove that the caretaker is in the home where they're supposed to be. And then they also wanted a start and end date. So SEIU and UDW, when this law was first passed in December of 2016, wrote a letter to the California Department of Social Services, basically opposing the bill and talking about the various issues that it posed, especially for our worker population. So one of the main issues was whether or not this was even ADA compliant, because it adds another burden to people who are aged and disabled who are needing care. But then we also raised the privacy concerns of people who are now having this, tracking technology in their house. They don't know necessarily what the parameters of it were going to be. For instance, the requirement about start and end time was kind of vague. We were like, do you have to do that at the start and end at every task? So once you start laundry, you start and end, you log in, start and end every time you make a meal, or if you have to take someone to a medical appointment, that also makes it harder. On top of the equity issues, just a lot of providers are making below poverty rate, just in terms of the overall amount of money that they bring in per year. We have a lot of immigrants and people of color and older people who don't necessarily have access to really good internet connection to be able to log into a certain system, or don't necessarily have the familiarity to be able to really navigate anything that's super complicated. So that was another concern that we raised. And there was some stakeholder engagement with the state, and we were able to sort of reach an agreement with the state and with a lot of lobbying, where they put in a system that was as non-invasive as possible. It was built off of the timesheet system that they were already using. And it just added a couple of drop-down fields that said, did you provide care in the home, in the community, or both? And then a start and end time just in general for the overall day. And we were hoping that that would be, that would satisfy the federal requirements. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I think the real sticking point was the lack of GPS tracking that the California original solution implemented. So currently, as of January 2021, California will be paying 15 to 16 million a year in FMAP penalties for not complying with the federal mandate for electronic visit verification. So where we stand right now is, one, we were able to get a couple of things. One is that providers still aren't getting any penalties in the state, or like violations for anything related to the EVV fields. Usually those are just now specifically related to the amount of hours people report compared to the amount of hours that they're qualified for. And also, if you are a live-in provider, parent, spouse, provider, you do not have to fill out any of the EVV fields. So at least for that provider population, they don't have to participate in that aspect of it. But there still remains some work to be done to sort of like find a halfway point between what the federal requirements are and what California's system is ultimately going to look like. It continues to be something that is on our radar. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much, Stasha. So I think next up, Ryan and I are going to give folks a brief overview of some of the efforts by worker advocates to begin to draft and put down on paper, like, what are the rights that we actually want for workers, given the very visceral examples that all of you have just heard about warehouses and home care. And I'm going to start us off by talking about what's been happening here in California. So we have had a major effort here for several years to begin to imagine and draft key worker rights concepts around digital technologies. It started when California passed the California Consumer Privacy Act in 2018. At that point, it was the first law of its kind in the country. It established that consumers have the right to know what data is being gathered on them, the right to correct it, and to some extent, the right to say no to that data collection. Originally, the definition of consumer was broad and could have included workers. But in 2019, a bill was introduced to explicitly exclude workers from coverage, and also, interestingly, independent contractors. I will spare you the details, but the upshot was that a group of worker and privacy advocates actually came together at the 12th hour to work out a compromise on that bill. But importantly, during that process, the question really became, what do we actually want for workers? Beyond some basic transparency and data rights, what do we actually want for workers? And so for the last year and a half, we've been supporting a loose configuration of worker and privacy advocates who've been coming together to build out a baseline policy framework targeted at state labor law that establishes worker rights and employer responsibilities around digital technologies. This is now a pretty extensive document, so I just want to give you some top lines around that framework. It is built around regulating worker data collection, electronic monitoring, and algorithmic management. And so here are some key concepts to give you a flavor of what folks have developed. Around transparency and disclosure, workers should know what data is being collected on them, what surveillance systems are being used, what algorithms are being used, and importantly, they should know how these are being used by employers in making decisions about their jobs and performance. And I will say that this often transparency and disclosure is sort of seen like a throwaway in legislation. We really feel like it is a critical linchpin here, because right now workers, unions, and worker centers are often very much in the dark about what employers are actually doing, what they're using. Right now, it's a black box. So for us, the transparency and disclosure piece is actually critical if we are going to build campaigns to build worker power around this tech. In terms of access to data, workers should have the right to fully access their data. They should have the right to correct their data. Equally important, employers should not be able to sell worker data and profit off of it. In terms of the use of electronic monitoring and algorithmic management, employers must be strictly regulated in their use of these technologies. These systems should not be used to undermine workers' health and safety, their economic security, their privacy, or in general, their well-being. Bad tech like facial recognition should be banned. These systems should not be used to suppress worker organizing. And most important, they can't be used as the primary basis for making employment-related decisions, such as hiring, firing, and discipline, and even be barred from using those systems altogether in making those decisions. The model policy also includes a requirement for impact assessments. Employers must conduct rigorous impact assessments on data collection and algorithmic systems before they use them in the workplace. Workers must have the ability to review and give input on those assessments. Those assessments must be filed with a state's labor agency, and employers must mitigate any harms to workers that are identified in those assessments. And then finally, strong enforcement. Workers should have absolutely a private right of action, and state labor agencies should have broad powers to investigate worker complaints, to apply penalties. And importantly, labor agencies should have the power to stop the use of harmful systems. So there's a lot more detail here, but I just want to give you a flavor. These are baseline concepts, given again that right now we're working with virtually a blank slate. There's much more that will be needed to protect workers and empower them. For example, similar to labor laws, anti-discrimination law needs significant updating to account for how digital technologies can exacerbate race and gender inequality. At the federal level, labor law reform will need to include close attention to how these digital systems are being used to suppress the right to organize, and to allow workers to fully bargain around this new tech. There is a lot more to figure out. We are literally here at the starting gates. And then finally, I do just want to finish by saying, I want to flag that our collective vision here extends beyond regulation. And in our view, ultimately, workers must lead in the design, in the development, and the implementation of digital tech in the workplace. This is not just about stopping the worst abuses, although right now that is a step we're focused on, but ultimately, this is about making technology work for workers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan, who can talk about also efforts at the federal level that are very much paralleling what we're doing in California.
Great, thanks, Annette. So I'm Ryan Gerety. I work at United for Respect, which is a national organization that organizes Walmart, Amazon, and other retail workers. Along with Sheheryar at WWRC, United for Respect co-founded the Athena Coalition, which brings together organizations to build power against Amazon. At the same time that Annette was bringing together folks in California to discuss a worker privacy framework, across Athena, we began to bring together worker organizations that organize Amazon workers and anti-surveillance organizations that organize against state violence. This includes organizations like Media Justice, Fight for the Future, Empower Change, Public Citizen, Free Press, and worker organizations like WWRC, Warehouse Workers for Justice, AWOOD, Make the Road, and United for Respect. And then we have many close collaborators like Color of Change, the Georgetown Center on Privacy and Technology, and our data bodies. This unique configuration of folks who focus both on worker rights and on technology and surveillance pushed us to think about workplace tech in a new way. And I should say part of this was bringing together worker organizers and anti-surveillance organizers, bringing together anti-surveillance organizers with workers themselves. And exactly 1 year ago, as the pandemic spread and Amazon workers began to speak out, we immediately saw retaliation against whistleblowers. And we saw Amazon's sprawling workplace surveillance was turned against those workers who were speaking out. Much of the retaliation targeted Black workers. And as Amazon built out technology that they claimed would keep workers safe, like social distance monitoring, they immediately began to discipline workers for infractions. So this closely mirrored how we see technology used against particular communities in this country, where the police and federal agencies deploy surveillance with the justification that it will keep us safe. But in reality, it's always turned against people, used punitively, and as a tool of mass incarceration. Communities are under a microscope, and every tiny infraction is penalized, often violently. So when the defund protest started last summer after the murder of George Floyd, we brought together Amazon associates to talk about Amazon's close partnerships with police departments. It's not an accident that warehouse workers who are paid low wages for hard work and who tend to be Black and brown are the same people who live in heavily policed neighborhoods. And so they saw the relationship between these two things very clearly. As Sheheryar described, associates talked about the ways that surveillance in warehouses is used to enforce a brutal pace of work. They talk about a constant cycle of monitoring and disciplining that creates injuries, anxiety, and enormous instability as workers are fired when they don't keep up. They talk about a lack of dignity, a lack of voice, and a lack of autonomy. They talk about it as a police state, as an authoritarian workplace, as a prison, and they talk about it as a plantation. While academics and advocates talk about algorithms and AI, workers themselves talk about the abuse of power, monitoring and control is the organizing principle of work. When monitoring and control is the organizing principle of employers, the abuses are predictable, and technology is a natural tool. Expanded control means workers are easily hired and fired. Their tasks are narrowly directed and monitored. It means the pace of work can be slowly accelerated despite widespread injuries. The combination of de-skilling, costless hiring and training, and the ability to maintain productivity through discipline rather than pay means that wages are eroded. Among grievances in Bessemer, where workers were working to unionize, central was their demand to end rate and time off task that Sheheryar described. Now, nothing about this tech is inevitable, and it's definitely not the tech of a healthy economy. And it's not, of course, just Amazon. Because we don't have any regulations in place, we're seeing a race to the bottom, a new kind of high-tech, low-road economy. And the Department of Labor and Congress can put in place guardrails that will get us off this low-road race to the bottom and end those practices. And so across Athena, and including a broader set of worker organizations and labor groups, and with Annette and the coalition she's built, we've started imagining what federal workplace protections against electronic monitoring and automated management could look like. The gaps that we have are not about the tech. The tech has really exposed the fault lines that we have in labor law, but the tech's also a place where we can actually contest power at this moment. So in addition to the principles that Annette laid out for legislation, just gonna highlight two things that workers that organize within Athena talk about. So first is around this constant monitoring and disciplining. Workers shouldn't be under constant monitoring. They shouldn't be monitored at all as it pertains to their discipline or termination. The Communications Workers of America have ended these practices for call center workers through their collective bargaining agreements. Teamsters have ended these practices for UPS workers. When workers can negotiate over these things, they refuse to have electronic monitoring used for discipline because it's a dangerous practice. And we should provide that safety for all workers. And then second, workers talk about a lack of autonomy and a lack of dignity. And we need to find ways to fight the automated control that means that workers have no choice, that every task is predictated to them, and that their every motion is chosen for them. Overall, workplace decisions, of course, should be more fair and transparent than they have been in the past. But we need to find ways to prevent workers from being moved from one task to another. Jeff Bezos, in his recent letter to shareholders, said that that's the kind of technology they were going to implement to keep workers safe. And we know that's not true. I think, corporations have used these new technologies to exploit existing gaps in labor laws, but it's also an opportunity for all of us and something we'd like to work with all of you all on. By pushing business models to their natural conclusion, it's forced a kind of reckoning. In the area of surveillance and automated control, it means that limitless employer supremacy is untenable. And so if we have these basic rights in place, in some ways we're asking for a more fundamental change than just sort of narrow regulations on the tech. We're asking for more workers to have greater autonomy and control in their workplace and for employers to have less power over them. And we'd be happy to collaborate with all of you. Annette, I'll turn it back to you.
Wonderful, thank you, Ryan. And next up we have Gabrielle.
Hi, everyone, and thank you again for having me. My name is Gabrielle Rejouis. I'm a senior policy manager at Color of Change, which is the nation's largest online racial justice organization. But today I'm here in my personal capacity as an advocate for greater worker data protection and for racial equity considerations in tech policy. I'll be giving a historical survey of the surveillance of workers in America. I'll talk about 3 historical accounts of surveillance: enslaved Africans, American factories, and the United Farm Workers. And I'll wrap up with a discussion of why cross-movement collaboration is needed. First, surveillance and privacy discourse rarely roots our current debates in history, but it's very important to know that these are neither new struggles nor new techniques, as my co-panelists have also raised. While the tools have evolved, the spirit behind the surveillance has not. Surveillance is often justified with myths. These invasive practices aren't happening in a vacuum, but interact with narratives being written about the population surveilled. I'd like to use 2 myths as organizing themes for this survey. The first myth is that workers are unreliable. They steal, they lie, they'll cheat their employers. So to protect themselves, employers can use surveillance as a means of social control, and sometimes even moral control. The second myth is that workers are lazy. If workers aren't watched, they won't do their jobs. So surveillance ensures workers will be as productive as possible. We can trace the surveillance of workers to American plantations. Simone Brown's book, Dark Matters, makes the argument that the surveillance of enslaved Africans provided the blueprint for surveillance today. And Matthew Desmond's essay for the New York Times Magazine 1619 Project digs into the system provided to ensure slavery was profitable. Farmers exerted great amounts of control over the enslaved population. Their comings and goings were monitored. Their productivity was closely scrutinized. And this surveillance evolved with sharecropping, with Jim Crow, and the prison industrial complex. Let's jump to the early 1900s, to the factories of the North, and to what people often think about when they hear about historic surveillance of workers. Frederick Taylor developed a system of industrial management to ensure factory workers were as productive as possible. Tasks were simplified. That's very similar to the de-skilling that we're seeing today. Foremen would use stopwatches to ensure that workers on the line completed tasks to meet daily goals. There was no room for error when a production was organized like science. In practice, Taylorism sought to make workers so efficient they would not be allowed to make mistakes. Workers were expected to be robots. The Ford factories are the best example of Taylorism in action. But Henry Ford did not stop at making his factories efficient. He also hired detectives to visit his workers at home to ensure they wouldn't engage or didn't engage in any behavior that might distract them from work. Workers would be interviewed about their marriages, if their children were in school, how much alcohol they drank, and how they spent their salaries. Ford used the detectives to hold employees to his moral standards. Lastly, I want to touch on surveillance to oppose and frustrate worker power. Managers use surveillance as a primary tool in attempts to disrupt worker organizing. But the government also has a history of surveilling labor activists for communist ties. J. Edgar Hoover, for instance, ordered a decades-long investigation of Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and the United Farm Workers during the 60s and 70s. The United Farm Workers sought to unionize Mexican and Chicano American farm workers harvesting agriculture in the American Southwest. The FBI surveillance and infiltration was so extensive that agents knew what Chavez ate for breakfast and were even arrested at worker demonstrations. But because no surveillance subversive activity was found, the United Farm Workers were left relatively unbothered. And there are modern examples of these stories when you think about the surveillance that incarcerated individuals experience, who are often expected to work and subsidize a lot of the work that we see today. When we think about the firefighters in California, when we think about agriculture as well in some places, we see Taylorism at work in Amazon fulfillment centers, as others have mentioned already. And also last year, during the height of the pandemic, there was a story that found that Amazon and Whole Foods had heat maps to determine which stores were most likely to unionize, of course, to use that information to bust those unions. So I think it's important for us to talk about collaboration. As Ryan mentioned, there's been a lot of work to sort of disrupt the surveillance of law enforcement on Black and Brown communities. And we're also seeing a lot of work that folks like Annette are leading to disrupt the surveillance that's happening in the workplace. But we shouldn't look at these two efforts separately. Surveillance reinforces carceral systems, and we're watching as private, public, and corporate state distinctions are eroding. When you think about the technology that big tech is building for government actors to conduct surveillance, or the ways that government actors are exploiting loopholes to access this information, So one example is Thomson Reuters and Salesforce building the infrastructure for ICE to surveil immigrant populations. Another example is with Clearview AI, which is a face recognition startup company that was offering access to their technology to law enforcement without them getting approval from their higher ups, or so is the story that we are hearing. And lastly, I also want to raise the story of US military intelligence accessing data from Muslim prayer apps, presumably to track this population as well. There are communities that are already fighting against surveillance, and they have things that they can teach others who are new to this work. Collaboration is needed to ensure that the solutions that are built have all stakeholders in mind. So for example, consumer privacy bills that have huge carve-outs for the workplace. So you will be protected from Google as a consumer, but if you work at Google, they'll have free rein to track your every move and to know what you're doing. Surveillance is a means to control populations, and labor must continue organizing around strong anti-surveillance protections at work. Y'all are very aware about the harms of surveillance at work, and it's time to turn that discontent into action. That can look like dedicated federal attention to these issues. So research of the harms and regulation and legislation that reflects the realities that folks are experiencing. That looks like prohibitions on what data can be collected, when and where it's collected, and how it's used. Opportunities for workers to shape policies around data collection and to have input on what new technologies introduce into the workplace. So they have an opportunity to know, to bargain ahead of time, rather than being blindsided. Evaluations of the algorithms being used to direct and manage workers to ensure that discrimination isn't happening, to ensure that all of the decision-making isn't being handed over to a system, without checking to see if the system is accurate, but also ensuring that, it's, when we think about like rate and time off task, it's very cold and very impersonal, and there should be stops in place to ensure that people aren't being treated as like robots. And lastly, ensuring that there's greater inclusion of protected workers. So instead of limiting it only to employees, also covering independent contractors and employees who work at franchises or who may be subcontracted. We're seeing that the misclassification wave that's been happening for decades is being used to ensure that workers don't have as much protection as possible. It's allowing for wage theft to happen, and so many other harms to workers. And so ensuring that there isn't inside and out, or who's in and who's out in terms of who has access to these protections, but making sure that all workers are protected equally. And I'll pass it back to Annette.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Well, that I just want to thank all the panelists for their presentations, and we actually have a good chunk of time now left for questions and answers. And I think because we've got a small group, I think we're just going to open it up, and folks should unmute themselves and jump in, and maybe folks can raise their hand, use the hand raising function, unmute themselves, and we can have more of a conversation back and forth between the panelists and those of you who joined us today. So opening it up for any thoughts, comments, questions, also examples of this tech in workplaces that you work in or with workers that you organize would be great. And don't be shy. Any takers?
Hi, Annette, this is Knut.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Good, from one fellow German to another, just saying.
Yeah, exactly.
My question would be if any one of the panelists could maybe address the opportunities of tech for organizing workers, kind of the flip side of what we've heard so far. I think I would appreciate that aspect. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ryan, do you want to talk about Work It?
Yeah. I mean, it's really a kind of a huge question, and actually I might pass it to Beth even, but at United for Respect, you know, we organize nationally. So we're organizing in warehouses around the country. And a lot of that work started on social media where people were already organizing in their workplaces and talking. And as it became clear that people were moving off Facebook onto platforms that were harder to organize on, and as Facebook changed their rules, the different tech was needed. So United for Respect is experimenting and having successes and lots of learnings in developing their own app which was called Work It originally. And that was a place where Walmart workers could come and ask questions about workplace policies. So there are things like that. We have, you know, Coworker is here. They've developed interesting models to let workers organize their own campaigns. I think that's all I'll say about that.
Anybody else have examples? I'm not sure if SEIU has been experimenting with Stasha, Somya on using tech, the flip side, using tech to reach your workers and organize them and keep them engaged or strengthen their connections to the union?
It's a little bit outside of what I in my day-to-day work, but I know that we've tried to do because I mean, home care workers and anyone that works in sort of like assisted living facilities, they're a very decentralized sort of workforce. And so it can be very hard to track people down. And even when there are registries that have workers that are like certified listed in them, in terms of like connecting names to actual people, that's something we've definitely tried to explore so that we could actually reach out to those workers and create a space where we could like gather them together. To be able to actually like organize these facilities more. And it's definitely been part of our work a lot more over the past few years. So I would say that that's probably the primary way in which we've been exploring technology as a way to bolster our organizing.
Great. Any other examples from folks who are?
This is Beth. I'll just jump in really quick. I've done some research on this. And it seems like, you know, there are a range of different kind of buckets that people are using for when thinking about how they're using digital tools. You know, some folks are really using it as a place to organize, right? Like Ryan was saying. And one example of that, I think that's really interesting in the home care sector actually is in Southern California. The Filipino Workers Center has been using these member circles where they make a WhatsApp group and have folks who are really atomized and really sort of spread out in their workplaces to have a place for them to come together. And I mean, the real goal of that, I think, is for them to be able to also influence, for there to be kind of a direct line between the organization itself and its members. And so the goal is for them to be able to weigh in, you know, in a form of small d democracy, to weigh in on the priorities of the organization and things like that. So that's one. There's sort of like the organizing bucket. There's folks like Aaliyah that are doing benefits provision, that are really just using, you know, the digital realm as a place to kind of aggregate people and coordinate their like benefits provision. It's limited, but it's definitely one attempt at that. And then there are sort of hiring hall platforms like Karina that matches home care workers and clients, but also tries to sort of set a higher floor and offers some other kind of like regulatory environment, like anti-discrimination and things like that. So I think there are a range of ways that it's happening. Even in the Bessemer, we heard about in Bessemer, the way that organizing actually happened because of the pandemic, I think in some ways really relied on being able to use digital tools, at least to like gather a small group of people in person. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's also a lot of like tensions and like limitations to all of that. So that's all I'm saying.
Great. Anybody else want to jump in on this question?
Hi, Annette. Can I talk about driver's seat?
Sure.
Hey, folks. Hayes Witt here with the Driver's Seat Cooperative. Really glad to be here with all of you and hear these presentations. I wanted to share a little bit about our work at Driver's Seat, where we are we're running a big long-term experiment to empower workers to collect their own data directly, starting with ride-hail drivers and on-demand delivery workers, and giving them the technology tools that they need to collect their movement and pay and work time data, and then also to be able to aggregate that data, use it to analyze their own situation together, and get a variety of different kinds of individual group level insights back from that we see as kind of the starting point for collective action and for policy change. And so would love to share more about that, in a follow-up with anybody who's interested in talking about it, and very interested in all of the presentations today, and would love to figure out how to get more closely connected to many of you and to this broader effort.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. I know we've got a couple of people here from Coworker, Wilneda and Tim. I don't know if you guys want to jump in and talk about what you all see especially on the public policy front, what you all see as really critical for the workers that you all represent. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. Tim, Wilneda? Maybe folks are monitoring something else. One thing I wanted to share, and folks who just keep jumping in, one thing I wanted to share on the policy front is that there's definitely movement now happening at the federal level, but it is also the case that the states are rapidly becoming like a terrain of pretty intense debate around these rights generally. And there are now 18 to 20 states that are entertaining or various forms of data privacy legislation. Most of them are focused on, many of them are replicants of the California bill. Most of them are focused on consumer rights. I would say about a third to a half of them already explicitly exclude workers. And so that's something we really need to get our arms around. There's clearly a model policy that is starting to be distributed through state legislatures. From the get-go, excluding workers is clearly becoming a model after the amendment to the California law. I will also say there's several states where there's very broad-ranging and, in our minds, really good legislation being introduced that really lays out a broad framework. And the ACLU, I don't know if anybody is on here from ACLU, the ACLU has been really good in helping legislators to frame out what do we actually want broadly, not just for consumers, but in general, in terms of what is the framework for regulation here around digital tech. So, and I recently saw an analysis of the debate around these bills, and it's very clear that, the Chamber of Commerce and tech companies themselves are individually starting to really weigh in on this tech. So that is one trend that I would really put on people's radar screen. And as is often the case in the US, I think a lot more the states will really be the lead, both negatively and positively here in this arena. And then the federal discussion will sort of make up the rear. The other thing that I would flag for folks is we are also seeing in a variety of states bills being drafted that are coming directly from the vendors of some of this technology that they're developing in concert with legislators. And there's a couple of really sort of intense examples of this where a software company that has hiring technology that supposedly reduces bias in hiring is drafting and trying to spread legislation that is basically a self-regulation bill. And so I raise that because I worry, I understand that the worker rights movement is just starting to get its arms around these technologies and how they're showing up in our workplaces. But we also don't have a lot of time to lose here. This race to governance, which is happening in multiple arenas, is really starting to gather steam. And at the state level in particular, I think it's really important that unions, worker centers, and other worker advocates are in the mix. And like Gabrielle really underlined, are making common cause with other allies in this space. And yes, I'm happy to, we actually have a list of states. And so if folks want to reach out to me afterwards, I'm happy to spread that around. And yeah, the states with good legislation are Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, and Washington state. So I wanted to share that piece in case useful. Great. Other questions, other thoughts from folks who are, oh, Chamtoli.
Hi, Annette. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Hi, sorry,
Yeah.
Go for it. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So, I'm sorry, I'm off camera. I'm fasting, so I look like a hot mess. But so my questions, I have two sort of questions, but broadly, just generally would love to connect with folks maybe in New York who are working on these issues. So just by way of introduction, I co-direct a workers' rights clinic. It's an inaugural clinic that's from the fall of last year. And so we would love to sort of connect with folks who are doing legislative or advocacy work. And so in our very limited time, we've already seen these technology issues. And so I wanted to kind of lift up and see if folks had suggestions of who to connect with or advocacy. So they kind of like are in maybe 2-3 areas. So one is how technology is being used also to evade sort of labor laws that are on the books. I know that many of you have talked about sort of the surveillance and sort of the need for greater protection, sort of perspective. So for example, time employers using online or digital time tracking devices, and then going in and modifying that. So when we're bringing wage and hour cases, it looks as if the worker is worked less hours, and there's really very limited ways for us to like prove that because a lot of that information is sort of in the domain of the employer. So just, you know, if people have sort of had thoughts about that. And you know, in the home care industry, I think Stasha talked about a little bit, the second technology that's being used is sort of creating these third-party entities that do the kind of like, here are your hours and tracking, but it's really as a way to avoid a lot of the home care workers as being treated as employees. And so greater regulation of these subcontracted entities, because then the home care agency is like, well, we're not the employer. And then these kind of entities that are, you know, have these apps, right? That are like, well, we're just the tech app, right? So this sort of finger pointing. So how technology is used just in these different ways to avoid labor laws. So like the laws that we do have them on the books, like we're having difficulty sort of like figuring out how to challenge that. And we want to challenge that in litigation. We're in the midst of thinking of a case now. So if anyone obviously can't share the details of it, but would be helpful to the tech side of how to support us. The second area is like, while there's worker surveillance, there's actually lack of employer transparency. So we want to find information about employers, you know, in terms of like, and this is both in, my work is both US and also supply chain. So like when we want corporate accountability and we want employers to share all of their data, that's like impenetrable, right? And so is there any effort to also align with folks who are kind of pushing for greater transparency of like corporations, you know, of multinationals? And so that's the second. And the third is like whether the sort of consumer protection area, like FICRA and all, which I think are really not great laws, but are they perhaps the kind of, you know, a floor from which to, you know, make the case for, we've already have some amount of, you know, regulation in terms of credit checks and whatnot. So yeah, so anyway, I know there's a lot. This is a great panel, and I agree with you, Annette, that we really need to kind of, you know, get moving on this. And I'm a newcomer, and already, like I said, in just one semester, just realizing how much it's impacting our ability to protect workers' rights, and how just it's being used, just in terms of like, you know, the current labor rights that the workers even do have. So any comments, and also offline if folks are who to sort of plug in with. Our school also does a lot of ICE data stuff. So, and our clinics also do a lot of criminal defense. So there's like an opportunity within the school to like look at this cross collaboratively as well. So I mean, I can't speak for other clinics, but I know that, you know, that's an issue of concern. So anyway.
It's so great, Shamtoli. I really appreciate those questions, and others should definitely jump in. I'll just say, you know, as you can imagine, Shamtoli, given that basically it's a blank slate here, when all of us have been thinking about the policy models here, it's both casting a broad net on the workers who are covered, so employees and independent contractors, but especially, I think, from the get-go, insisting that labor subcontractors and the software vendors themselves are also being regulated vis-a-vis these bills, and at the very least establishing joint liability. But I think we need to be even more imaginative in the extent to which we insist that the mandates that we're putting on employers extend directly and fully to the subcontractors and fully to the vendors. And, you know, as many of you know better than me, there's definitely precedent on the subcontractor side via, you know, the joint employer status, but via the vendors is really a tricky one that I think lawyers are really going to have to figure out. And, you know, I think we will be establishing, you know, potentially new law here, and in terms of our ability to force, you know, private sector third-party vendors as via employment and labor law requiring their compliance with these regulations. Are there others who want to respond to Shamtoli? And then I know that Anna has her hand up.
I mean, I would just say in New York, there's a bit of a working group on technology policy in general, and a smaller working group that's looked a bit at worker bills. As Annette sort of hinted at, there's a Piemetrics bill that's being floated in New York, and we're advocating for a moratorium on these hiring algorithms, at least until we can figure out a sensible regulatory framework. And I think there's quite a lot of help on that that's needed. In addition, there's privacy law that Catalina Cruz has put forward that includes workers, lots of room to do more. So it would be great to have you join that group that's like includes STOP and the ACLU, Make the Road, Align, and other groups. I mean, one thing in terms of, you know, you were sort of pointing out like what are models that we might use. One danger, I think, coming out of the privacy community is that there are some things which people advocate to ban, like face recognition, but otherwise there's much more of a sort of, in the best case, like an opt-in, like very clear notice, anti-bias, anti-discrimination policies. But in the workplace, where like health and safety concerns are front and center, and where like a person's livelihood is critical, and where like we actually all have a stake in if we have a sort of low road economy or not, is that actually we can put in place much stronger restrictions that actually steer the course of the economy. And that's essential. And that's very different than, I think, consumer privacy policy, where we're not necessarily trying to like steer the direction of the internet. I think in the workplace, we absolutely have to if we want positive economic outcomes, as opposed to these like, you know, terrible jobs and high corporate profits.
Yeah.
Anyone else who wants to respond to Shamtoli?
Yeah, I want to respond to the question about FICRA, and I think that there are I'm curious about the unique ways to attack some of the technology that's being used in the workplace. It seems like this FTC is very interested in looking at algorithms, looking at the deceptive claims being made around algorithms. So while we wait for legislation that shapes like the regulatory frame around employment algorithms, so the ones that are used to hire folks as well as the ones that are used in the workplace, it would be interesting to see if the FTC could bring a case against a company that's claiming that we can scan an applicant's face and tell you how trustworthy they are, or we'll have them do these unrelated tests and see how well they'll be a fit for this organization. Like I think the EEOC would be another great avenue to see, sort of like having them come in and determine like, is this actually more discriminatory than helpful? I know that with Rohit Chopra going to CFPB, thinking about other fintech and the ways that that impacts workers and undermines, their access to their wages. Just trying to think outside of the box as we continue to push for an update to the labor laws.
Great. Anybody else who would like to respond to Shamtoli? Or I know Anna has a question. Anna, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi there, my name is Anna. Thank you for the panel. This has been super interesting. And I just wanted, my question is about that historical connection to Taylorism. I really appreciate that being brought in this historical context, being brought in because it does seem so relevant to principles of scientific management. And my question is, to maybe speak on some of the lessons or opportunities that at least the temporary decline of Taylorism might say about the current, resurgence in employers, leveraging these data against workers. Like, I just wonder if anyone has perspective on how aggressive Taylorism fell out of fashion, not just fell out of fashion, but like why workers were able to overcome it and change those laws. And I would sort of assume that part of the reason it's become so resurgent is at least in part in the technological, capabilities that have allowed monitoring and surveillance to be relatively simple or simpler than it was, pre-1970. So yeah, just what lessons from the history of Taylorism might serve us today in trying to repeal some of these things?
Yeah, and I have like just jumping in really quick, I have like a basic understanding of Taylorism. So I can imagine that the decline of Taylorism coincided with the rise of the labor movement and with more people being unionized. And as we're seeing like a shrinking of the percentage of the American population who are represented by unions, we're then seeing this resurgence. When I think of the workplaces and the industries that experience the most practices similar to Taylorism, these are the ones where it's illegal for them to unionize, so thinking about contract work and those in the gig economy, and also in places like Amazon warehouses where this is like a very anti-union company. But yeah, happy to kick the ball to others to, or pass it to others to jump in.
I mean, one way, it's such a great question, Anna, and I'm also like Gabriella. I wish I knew my history better. I will say that one thing that might be potentially different here is, I think in some, or in addition here, is I think in some cases, this kind of de-skilling and breaking jobs apart into smaller bits and pieces is a preamble to is potentially a preamble to outright automation. Both in breaking apart the tasks, simplifying them. Once you've done that, task 1, 2, and 3 can actually be done via chatbot, for example. And the other part of this that we haven't talked about is also one of the functions of the monitoring is to actually, train the eventual algorithm that's going to take over the task, which is something I don't think we have our heads on enough, but which I think going forward that, the theme here is automating the humans, right? But you need human beings to train the robot or the algorithm, their replacement, and sort of this kind of very systematic breaking down into constituent tasks is a precursor to that.
So maybe one thing that I'll add to that is, I mean, it's certainly the case, Anna, like you raised, that as technology has gotten cheaper, some of these practices that Taylor recommended, which were quite difficult and arduous, sort of measuring and monitoring each piece, are now extremely cheap to implement and easy. So that's perhaps one piece. I also, as I understand, there was immediate worker opposition, both to the notion to be studied for efficiency purposes and to be watched at all. And you had craft workers protesting in the early 1900s, and then workers where scientific management was rolled out also protested. I think the federal government acted to roll that back in some places. And, at a certain point, as unions began to negotiate around these kinds of practices, they may have come to an agreement that worked for them. And in some ways that's left non-unionized workers really left out in the Wild West where anything is possible. And now we're seeing sort of the natural conclusion of that. And I think, one problem for our country, because so few workers are unionized and because it's been so hard to regulate the economy, that the ability for a workplace to use technology to actually increase efficiency and increase the public good is basically been foreclosed, because all we're seeing is these predatory models, except in the few places where workers have some voice, where you can see the tech being used positively. But in other cases, it's always going to default to these low road models. And so we're going to end up with an economy where we don't have workplace tech that actually helps build a better economy.
Yeah, no, that's super useful. And I also wanted to share briefly with folks, and then we can start wrapping up. We recently talked with somebody who is working with Uni Global to figure out how to organize call center workers in the global South. And so the other part of this, there's both the inequality within countries about how the tech is being used, but there's a lot of advocates from the global South who also argue that as we begin to increase our regulation here in the global North, that what's going to happen is that the global South becomes the dumping ground and the experimentation ground for bad tech, for bad AI, et cetera, and extreme and hyper surveillance. And the stories they had of call center workers in you know, in the Philippines. Actually, Albania apparently is becoming a big site. And the conditions that they were working in, especially during COVID. And so everyone is doing this from their homes, you know, with very tight living spaces. And the level of surveillance was so intense and over the top, and absolutely, you know, obviously no regulation. So that's the other piece of this that I think we also need to be very concerned about, figuring out how to move forward across countries on a workers' rights agenda, because otherwise I think we are gonna really, it's gonna result in this extreme inequality in terms of what workers are being subject to. So a final call for any questions, and then I think we can close the panel down and give you a little bit of time before the next set of panels. Just wanted to give folks a chance for any final questions, or from the panelists for any final comments. Feel free to reach out to any of us. As you can tell, we're very excited to be working in this new area, and would love to bring in more folks into it. And with that, I think, seeing no additional takers, I will say thank you, everybody, and especially the organizers for adding this panel. And I hope everyone has a great day going forward.
Thanks, everybody, for
Thanks,
coming.
everybody. Thanks,
Ciao,
everybody.
ciao.